everybody. So here we are. We are starting a new chapter today, and this chapter is really going to be a 150-year time period known as Baroque art. We are going to start our journey in Baroque art in Italy because that's where it actually begins. And I'm going to be creating various videos for the other areas of Europe where Baroque art will spread to. So if you have not looked at the note packet that I have attached to this post on Google Classroom, please go through and look at that first. It's not long, 3 pages. It focuses on kind of the main characteristics of Baroque art as well as some of the key artists, Bernini and Caravaggio. Now, if we are looking at art history, we are right now, Baroque art begins in the very early 1600s, late 1500s, and it is a reaction to the Protestant Reformation. So the Protestant Reformation, if you don't remember from our last PowerPoint and our last video on mannerism, I brought it up. The Protestant Reformation is Martin Luther is leading this revolution, this religious revolution in Europe because he was upset that the Catholic Church was selling indulgences. He thought it was corrupt. So he will leave. His followers are called Protestants. They're protesting the Catholic Church, and they will start their own church. Now, the Catholic Church is losing hundreds of thousands, even millions of people during this era. And what the church is going to do is there will be something called the Counter-Reformation. And the Counter-Reformation is when the church tries to get its act together to stop people from leaving the church and fix the problems that people are upset about. So the church is going to have a multi-pronged approach to how they are going to fix the problems that people have with the Catholic Church. First one is they are going to combat Protestantism by stopping the sale of indulgences. They are also going to form the Inquisition, which is going to essentially force people to accept the Catholic faith that may have been converted to Protestants. They will start the Jesuit order of priests, and they are also going to promote the arts. And this is where, we come in. This is where Baroque art comes in. So you are going to see the Catholic Church create magnificent new churches to display the church's triumph and attract, hopefully, new worshipers. And we are also going to see magnificent works of art that some people will look at as must-see, and they will be theatrical, and they are going to try to appeal to the emotions of everyday people and win back some of those followers to the Catholic faith that may have thought about leaving and becoming Protestant. In Baroque art, you're going to see, especially in Italian Baroque art, the dramatic use of light to focus on the main theme of the painting or the main subject matter of the painting. People are going to be portrayed very realistically. They're going to reject in Baroque art that kind of elongated body forms, that figura serpentinata where the bodies seem to twist and meander. Baroque art is going to go back to the realism, but they're going to heighten the drama. All right, so let's get into what you guys have to write in your notes. So you want to write in your notes right there that we are now in the Baroque era, art and architecture, and this video is just going to focus on the art of Italy. I'll make another video that has Spanish and Flemish art and Dutch art and also French art. So you want to think about, well, what are the characteristics of Baroque art from Italy? So if we look at the difference between Renaissance art and Baroque art, these two images really kind of show us the difference. So in the Italian Renaissance, we have a picture there on the left by Raphael. It's the Madonna with Jesus and St. John the Baptist. We have that pyramidal composition where the figures are very solid. Mary herself makes an entire pyramid. We have the atmospheric perspective in the background. We have properly modeled and shaded figures in a realistic setting. Now, if we go to the Baroque art era, we see drama. This is called the entombment of Christ. Christ's lifeless body being lowered into his tomb. A woman throwing her hands up in the background, praying to God. So a lot more drama, a lot more focused on the subject matter because the light is shining on the main characters and the background is black. They don't, in Baroque art, they don't want you to get lost in the background. They want you to focus on the emotion and the heightened sense of drama within the painting itself. We've already talked about some of this, so make sure you write this down in your notes. I'm not really going to go through and talk about this because I brought all this up in the beginning of the video. So to hit pause, copy that into your binder. So Baroque actually means irregularly shaped or odd. It's actually a negative term that 18th century art historians will give this time period because they look at Baroque art as being against the rationality and the harmony of the Renaissance time period. It's kind of like when in the Renaissance time period they gave Gothic a derogatory name, and that's not something that is unheard of in art history. And if we look, it's kind of like this rise and fall of the same kind of concepts throughout art history in Europe in the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, then the Baroque, and then we will have something called Neoclassicism in the 1700s that we will look at next, which is kind of like Europe going back to Renaissance style characteristics. So this is what Europe looks like essentially in the 1600s. Spain, united country. England, united country. France, united country. Italy, still fractured, okay? We still have those city-states that we had back in the High Renaissance. Germany, not a united country. Right now it is sitting under the name of the Holy Roman Empire, which essentially dominates Central Europe. You will have the United Provinces of the Netherlands becoming a united country, a wealthy country because of trade. And that's kind of the dominant powers right now. We're not really focusing on anything in Russia or in Scandinavia at this point. So this is a breakdown of all the different types of Baroque art seen throughout Europe in the 1600s. If you look, it starts in Italy first. The emphasis, the subject matter is going to be a lot of religious works because of the church trying to win back congregants through emotional artworks. The major patron is going to be the church. The style of Baroque Italian art is going to be very dynamic, very emotional, and the qualities are, again, drama, intensity, and also the use of movement. And as we go through other various videos on Baroque art, we'll go through this chart again so that we can kind of see the differences between the different areas. All right, so if we were to kind of go back and forth and compare Renaissance art to Baroque art, Renaissance art is cool and calm. Baroque art, very hot, very emotional. Renaissance art, intellectual, meant to make you think. Renaissance art is simple, clear. Baroque art can often be complex. It could be mysterious. It might even be overwhelming to some people, especially when we get into some of the church ceilings of this era. Renaissance art, the buildings themselves might be regular or flat, and you might have the same patterns repeated over and over again on the outside of a Renaissance piece of architecture. In Baroque art, you might have irregular surfaces that may zig and zag and move with these undulating forms. And in Renaissance art, the aim is to please the eye and ennoble the mind. In Baroque art, the aim was to transport the viewer with the use of this sensual appeal, meant to make you feel something. Baroque art in Italy, the key characteristic is the use of something called tenebrism. You need to know this term because it's very, very, very dominant in Baroque art, especially that in Italy. And tenebrism is the use of one dramatic light source that illuminates the main figures, and the background is usually pretty dark. Also in Baroque art, people look very realistic. They are usually drawn from everyday life, and the focus is on dramatic moments. We are going to focus on our first artist. His name is Caravaggio. He literally is the creator of the Baroque style. He is influenced by Michelangelo. He is influenced by Raphael, and he is going to take those influences and shape them into a more dramatic and emotional feeling in his art. He is considered the most original painter of all of those in the 17th century. He is kind of also looked at as the first bohemian artist because he kind of traveled from place to place throughout Italy. He spends a lot of time in Rome. He actually is run out of Rome because he is accused of murder. He's seen as one of the first bad boys of art. He had a lot of illustrious affairs with men, usually young men who were prostitutes, with women as well. But he does have a massive influence over artists living in Italy. And the followers of him are called Caravaggisti, and they are just known as followers of Caravaggio. He will die relatively young, but he lives a very hard and fast lifestyle. This is an example of some of his early work. This is a very androgynous image, probably of someone that he was having an affair with. It's called Boy with a Fruit Basket. Emotional, androgynous, but we start to see the beginnings of that Baroque feel, that tenebrism. We have a relatively darkened background. We have one light source coming in and shining down towards the left, with the other side in shadow. Now, this is the one piece that you do need to know for the art history exam. This is called The Calling of St. Matthew. So St. Matthew, just to give you a little bit of context here, was a tax collector, which is why he is seated here at a table with coins that are being counted. And the story that is being shown is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, and it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. He says, follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. The two figures on the left are so concerned, if you look by counting the money, that they do not even notice Christ's arrival. It's symbolic. Their attention is not even drawn to Christ because they're not holy figures. If you look, Christ has entered. He's in the very dark portion on the very far right-hand side of the painting, and he has his hand very much held out like that of Adam in the Creation of Adam piece by Michelangelo. We have that light source up there, and next to Jesus, you also have St. Peter. So it's Jesus and St. Peter coming in to call Matthew to be an evangelist for the Christian faith. And that hand is almost meant to be, Jesus is kind of meant to be like the second Adam. And he was, again, very influenced by Michelangelo, and that's where that hand form comes from. And then Matthew is the bearded man that is pointing to himself as if saying, who, me? And they're dressed in kind of very contemporary clothing for the time period. And again, you see here the connection between the creation of Adam and the calling of St. Matthew. And it's almost as if you were to put the two paintings next to each other. You have Adam and Jesus both kind of almost reaching out towards each other. And you have it a little bit stretched out here. You see a little bit better the qualities of the painting. But dark background, one light source, very dramatic, and meant to kind of make you focus on just the main subject matter. That is why that one light source was used. Now, the calling of St. Matthew was actually in a very small chapel in a larger church. So the chapel had all sorts of images of St. Matthew's life. So this was the first image that Caravaggio creates for the chapel, and it's also the same chapel that Calling of St. Matthew is in. The church didn't really like this because they thought it made St. Matthew look dumb in some way, because it's essentially an angel helping him to write the Gospel of St. Matthew. So he redid the painting. This painting was destroyed in World War II. And this is the one that he redid. Essentially, you have the angel flying in, much more Baroque, if you ask me. The dramatic light source, the dramatic background. And then you have the angel kind of saying, hey, listen, talk about this. And then you have St. Matthew there writing. This is the chapel where it's at. You can see the Calling of St. Matthew, very large painting on the right-hand side. Then you have St. Matthew writing his gospel. And then to the other wall, you actually have the martyrdom of St. Matthew. He's actually executed by an Ethiopian king. Now we have the painting I have hanging up in my class. This is Judith slaying Holofernes, a famous painting by Caravaggio. It's not in your image set. It comes from a story that was called the Apocrypha. It is a series of books about biblical characters, but they're not officially part of the Bible. They're not in the Old Testament. Judith essentially gives herself to Holofernes, who is an Assyrian king. He was going to take over Israel. He gets drunk in the tent that night. She takes Holofernes' own sword and gives 2 whacks to his head and his head comes off, and her servant is there, takes the head, and when his army sees that their leader has been decapitated, it is seen as a miracle because the army just gets up and leaves, and Israel is saved. And it's Baroque because we have this dramatic emotion of the blood spewing out, the moment of the sword going into Holofernes' head, and it's this drama being evoked by this one event, which we haven't seen in any of the other images coming from any other time period that we've looked at so far. So we're going to talk next about just one woman who is not in the art history textbook. She should be in the art history repertoire. Her name is Artemisia Gentileschi. She is a member of the Caravaggio, which again is a group of people following in Caravaggio's footsteps. She's considered the first feminist painter, and she is one of the very earliest female painters to be widely known and appreciated. Her private life plays a large role in the art that she creates. Her father was an artist. Her father actually hires a tutor to teach her while she is growing up. He actually rapes her. She goes to her father and tells her father that she was raped by this man, and her father sues him, and it becomes this really big moment in Rome because it gets plastered all over the newspapers, and she's humiliated by this because the newspapers essentially make her look bad, even though she was the victim of this. And she kind of translates this trauma that she experiences into all of her work by making women feel or look at least empowered, because she felt as if she was not empowered. She was taken advantage by her tutor. She was also taken advantage in the press and made to look really, really poorly, essentially. So this is an example of her feminist work, essentially a woman being harassed by older men. Again, it's a story from the Bible, Susanna and the Elders. And we see here this woman who is pushing away these two men, and this is essentially one of her earliest works. And it really just kind of shows the idea of how, she felt women were being represented and treated in society. Now, her most famous piece is a piece where she essentially copies what one of Caravaggio's paintings. This is her own version of Judith slaying Holofernes. And if you were to look at the two, Judith is much more empowered here. Her maidservant is holding down Holofernes. We have Judith taking a much more active role. She's not kind of shrieking away from this job that she has. If you were to compare the two, Judith seems more dainty in Caravaggio's, where she seems much more empowered in Artemisia Gentileschi's version. Both, again, at that moment of decapitation of Holofernes, but again, Artemisia's is much more female empowered, but we still have that Baroque quality of the one light source, the dark background, the emotional concept. All right, so in my next video, I'm going to finish Baroque art, and we're going to talk about some sculpture and some architecture. I will see you then.